Hello to you newcomers and welcome back subscribers. This is Big Baby Props and I'm the Big Baby. And I have something very special for you today, something never before seen in Star Wars canon, the Phase 1 Damaged Wolffe helmet. I imagine this is how his helmet looked after his fight with Asajj Ventress when he lost his eye. Originally this helmet was destined for the trash due to damage it received during shipping, but I'm very thankful I was able to save it and make it into something unique. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you guys exactly how I did it and exactly how you can follow those same steps. I did want to mention that this original helmet is available for sale in my shop, so be sure and check that out if you want to complete this project and support the channel at the same time. I really appreciate all your guys' support. So with that out of the way, let's get right into it. So when finishing a 3D printed prop, your first challenge is generally going to be to fill in the 3D printer lines. For that, we're going to be using a product called Rust-Oleum Filler Primer. This stuff is kind of like really thick, tacky spray paint. We're going to spray it on all over the helmet. The material is going to kind of seep its way into the print lines and fill them in for us. Now this isn't going to make it perfectly smooth all around, but we're going to shoot for getting about 80% of the lines filled in with about 20% of the effort. I generally like to apply 3 to 4 very thick coats. I say thick coats because at this point we're not too concerned with runs or applying too much filler primer, because after this we're going to be sanding it all away, so any runs or streaks don't really matter. What matters right now is to fill in all those printer lines, so applying heavy coats is the way you want to go. Like I said, 3 to 4 coats. Wait about 20 minutes in between each coat for it to kind of dry, and then what we'll do is move on to the next smoothing technique. As you can see, the helmet kind of has a shine to it. That's how you know the material is applied on pretty well and that it's going to be working its way in to those printer lines. Again, don't worry about filling in all of them. Some of the printer lines near the top and bottom, for example, are going to be just too big to fill in with the spray paint can. It would take 3 or 4 cans. So just really work on filling in 80% of the print lines with 3 or 4 good coats of this stuff. So to fill in the rest of the 3D printer lines, we're going to be using a product called Bondo Glazing and Spot Putty. As you can see, the printer lines at the top here are very obvious, so we're going to be using this product to smooth them out. You're going to want some gloves and a respirator, as well as to do this in a well-ventilated area, because this stuff does kind of smell bad. I like to refer to this stuff as kind of like thick toothpaste. We are going to put a small dab of it on our finger, and then just wipe it over the helmet. What this stuff will do is, after about 30 minutes to an hour, it'll really start to harden up, and it'll soon be indistinguishable from the plastic. So then what we'll be able to do is sand it with some sandpaper and get the smooth finish that we're after. This stuff is also great for, just about everything on the helmet. If there's some sections that the filler primer didn't get anywhere, use this stuff. Kind of just wipe it on with your finger and work it in there. So once you have all of the printer lines that you can see filled in with either Bondo or filler primer, our next step is going to be to start sanding. So sanding is going to be the most difficult part of this whole process. You can see there, I've got a few materials with me that you might need. One, I have a mouse powered sander. This is optional, of course. We've got a pad of 150 grit sandpaper, a microfiber cloth, as well as some higher grits of sandpaper. Now the mouse sander is obviously optional. I like to use it simply because it makes the whole sanding process a lot shorter. I'm able to sand off the rough first layer of Bondo and filler primer pretty easily. You obviously want to be careful if you're using a powered sander, because you really don't want to sand away too much, and the plastic underneath is pretty sensitive to heat. So I just like to use the mouse sander as a brief first pass to save myself some time sanding later on. After that, I'll wipe it down with the microfiber cloth and then grab a small square of 150 grit sandpaper. Then I'll go around the entire helmet, sanding it all with that 150 grit. Once I'm done with that, I'll typically move up to 300 grit and sand it all again to get a smoother finish. Now if you go through these sanding steps and still see some defects that you might have missed, that is perfectly okay. In fact, I kind of expect it on my own helmets. So, to fill in those lines that you missed, simply redo the previous 2 steps. Apply some filler primer where necessary, and then follow it up with Bondo if necessary, and then you'll sand it again. I basically repeat these first 3 steps until I'm left with a perfectly smooth helmet. But really, it's up to you guys and your preferences. You can use a much higher grit sandpaper to get a much smoother finish. You can go all the way up to 1000 or 2000 even if you really want it smooth. I typically stop at 300 simply because I'm comfortable with how it feels after that. But it's completely up to you guys what you want to go for. So at the end of this process, you should have a smooth helmet that you are comfortable with. After you've completed this step, we can start damaging and painting the helmet, which is going to be the most fun. So hang in there. So this next step is pretty fun. We're going to start damaging the helmet, really making it look cut up, scratched up, and basically beat to hell. For that, we're going to be using the soldering iron. For those of you that don't know, soldering irons are used to join electrical components by melting a metal called solder. So you basically plug it in and the end will get very hot. These are soldering iron tips, not so much used for joining electrical components, but we're going to be using them sort of like a clay sculptor uses different tools to get the effect that they want. So since the soldering iron gets so hot, it's going to pierce the plastic of our helmet fairly easily. And we're going to use that to our advantage. The first thing we're going to do is cut out a portion of the visor, sort of simulating a lightsaber cut, since that is what happened to Wolffe when he fought Asajj Ventress. I find that just dragging the soldering iron along the helmet takes too long. What I like to do is just poke holes in it, kind of perforating any cuts that I'm going to make, and then following it up by just dragging it through those cuts, or those holes really. You can see me just poking holes through the visor section of the helmet, and then I'll follow it up later and actually remove the piece inside. Once you're satisfied with the cut to the visor, put on one of your soldering iron extensions. I went for one that kind of looked like a knife blade, and I'm going to be just applying cuts all the way around the helmet. You want to go for some deeper cuts as well as some shallower cuts, just for realism, but try and keep it to like 2 or 3 really deep cuts, just to make it look realistic. Remember, you can always melt away more, but you can't really unmelt the plastic. So I start the visor cut pretty small and then expand it out later. After you've completed all your cuts, just go grab a cutting tool and clip away the extra plastic that was raised up out of it. And do remember, it is definitely possible to go overboard with this step, so keep that in mind as you're cutting the helmet up. Our next step is going to be to start painting this thing. So let's get to it. So this is probably obvious, but we're going to have to start with painting it white. I use a flat white. You could also use a gloss white for this, but I find that after we're done weathering the helmet, most of the gloss is kind of dulled out anyway. It's very important at this step to avoid any streaks or runs. I know we said it was okay earlier, but now it is not. Since any streaks or runs that happen, you're going to have to wait for the paint to dry, and then we'll have to sand them out. So be very patient with this step. Apply 3 to 4 coats of light paint around the helmet, and then once that's completed, we can start taping it up to apply our other colors. So now that we've got our helmet in a nice flat white state, we're going to start applying the other colors. And for that, we're going to need some tape. So I have some thick blue tape for coverage and some thinner clear tape just for detailing. Now this taping step is probably the longest step in the whole process, but it's easy enough to do with Netflix on in the background, so it's not really a big deal. Just bring up your reference image that you're trying to emulate on your helmet and start taping away. We're going to be laying tape over everything that we want to remain white and leaving everything that we want to be gray. You kind of have to think backwards about it, but I think you guys will figure it out. Now Wolffe probably has one of the most complex designs out of any of the clone troopers, so what I like to do is use a fine tip Sharpie to kind of draw out the design first and then start cutting away the tape with an X-Acto knife. You want to make sure that your tape stays firmly secured to the helmet. I've had it before where I use some cheap tape, and as I'm painting, the tape flaps up and I paint what I didn't want to, and I have to fix it, which is a big pain in the neck. So make sure your tape is secured and fastened to your helmet. Once you're done taping up the helmet, we're going to do one more thing before we start painting. Now that we've got the full design taped up on the helmet, we're going to do one more thing. We're going to be applying something called liquid latex around the helmet. Now what this stuff is, it's kind of like a movie prop thing. It comes out as a liquid, and after about half an hour, it'll start to thicken up and really become rubbery. What we're then going to do is when we paint over the helmet, we'll also paint over the latex, but the latex we can rub off with our finger, and it's really going to give it that chipped paint look. So since this helmet is so damaged, we're going to be applying the latex, one, inside all of the cuts that we made with our soldering iron, and two, just kind of in random places that we think paint would chip off. Now, I'm going to be applying the liquid latex with some cotton swabs. I would advise against using a paintbrush that you like, because once the latex kind of rubbers up, it'll ruin your paintbrush, which is why I use disposable cotton swabs. Remember, it's very easy to go overboard with this step, just like any other weathering step, so keep that in mind as you apply the latex. The cotton swabs also have a tendency to leave the latex in kind of just a round blob, which kind of isn't really what we want. Try and get it as jagged as possible, if that makes sense. Just because a blob of paint doesn't really chip off, it kind of chips off in shards. So try and emulate that with your latex. Once the latex has rubbered up, we can start painting over it. So now that the latex is kind of rubbered up, you can see it's changed color to like a nasty looking yellow. Then we can start painting. Now I just use a plain rattle can, a flat gray primer, nothing too extreme here. And again, just start applying it on the helmet, making sure that your tape is fully secured before you start painting. Now, just like the white coat, any runs or streaks here are not acceptable, so be sure and take your time with this. Apply some very light coats of paint. Now the gray doesn't take as many coats as the white, so I only do about 2 coats. Again, just make sure that your tape is fully secured and that you do some light coats. Once you're done with your coats, we're going to move on to one of the most satisfying parts of the process and peeling off the tape, revealing our badass looking design underneath. So now is the time to revel in your spectacular tape work. You can basically just start peeling off the tape wherever you want, and it should reveal the design underneath. Now again, don't be too forceful peeling off the tape. I've had it before where I'll accidentally peel up like the white as well as the filler primer and Bondo, so just peel off the tape gently and slowly, and you shouldn't have that problem. Now is also the time to rub off the latex that we applied earlier. You can do that with your finger. Look around for any of the cuts and raised areas where you'll see the latex, and then just rub it off with the finger. Now this helmet looks pretty damaged right now, but we can go further. So some of the next steps involved are going to be weathering the helmet to make it look even gnarlier than it does now. So right now our helmet looks a little bit too white for my liking. So what we're going to do is we're going to blacken it up. For that, you're going to need a sponge brush, a cup filled with some water and paint, some black acrylic paint, and some paper towels. Some gloves also come in handy. Now what you do is mix up a bit of paint along with just a little bit of water and slosh it together to really get a nice black slosh, basically. Then what we're going to do is apply the slosh around sections of the helmet, and then shortly after, wiping it off with our paper towels. Now what this black is going to do is it's really going to seep into the cracks and crevices of the helmet as well as the cuts that we made, and then when we wipe off the paint with our paper towels, we're going to get most of the paint, but some of the paint is going to be left behind on the surface as well as in those recessed areas, really giving it that worn, dirty, and battle damaged look. The trickiest part of this step is getting the right paint to water mixture. What I recommend is having a little bit too much water in it at first, because you can always add more paint to it. But if you added too much paint, it can be kind of hard to get the black paint off of the helmet once it's painted on. Whereas if the mixture has too much water in it, you can always apply more layers or add more paint. So just go around the entire helmet doing this method, paying particular attention to the cracks. We really want black paint inside of those. So if it looks like the paint's not getting in there, you might see me specifically target it with a paintbrush. This is really going to make the helmet look a lot dirtier and more battle worn, which is what we're going for. Our next step in the process is going to make that come to life even more. So the black paint really made the white a lot dirtier, but as you can see, the gray is kind of untouched other than the latex. So what we're going to do is grab a very low grit sandpaper. In this case I used 60 grit, and we're just going to use that to scratch up some of the gray paint. You can just apply it. You can just apply a bit of pressure with your fingers and scratch up the surface, and it's really going to make it look a lot more realistic and battle damage, since the black paint didn't really do much to the gray. Now we're going to be applying this especially around some of the hard edges of the helmet, since the hard edges are the ones most likely to get the paint rubbed off first. You can see the bottom of the helmet, I scratch up the mohawk, as well as the brow and just a couple of other hard edges around the helmet. You can see we're also applying it just anywhere really that we think might receive some scratches, and this is really going to add some realism to the helmet, so definitely a step that I would recommend. Now, as I'm sure you guys know, all clones have a visor, so for that we're going to be using a Hobart face shield that I found on Amazon. I'll be sure and leave a link to it in the description. So we're going to need to cut out a section of this face shield in order to fit it both into the visor that's already there, basically, as well as our section that was cut out. So this step is pretty straightforward. I just cut it out with some really old scissors that I had laying around, and try and get it to form as close as you can to the visor space that you're trying to fill. Now, I haven't tried it yet, but a user in another video suggested that you put the visor in some hot water, some not quite boiling but hot, and that way you can form the visor to more of a curve that fits your helmet, so you'll have less resistance trying to fit it on. Again, I haven't tried it yet, but I trust them enough to recommend it. We're just going to be using some duct tape to apply the visor and stick it on inside. So now that the visor's in, we're going to have to cut it up and melt it just like we did the giant gash in the visor. So again, we're going to be using our handy soldering iron to kind of poke holes in it, just like we did for the lightsaber cut. I'm going to be poking some holes in it and then dragging the soldering iron through those holes, cutting out the visor. And you're probably going to want some lung protection for this as well, since you'll need to be pretty close to the visor and there's going to be some fumes coming off of that. Now, this is the last step in the process, so once you guys have completed that, let's take a look at our finished helmet. As you can see, we've got a nice cut out of the visor that goes along with the cut dealt in the helmet. So now, let's try this thing on. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I really enjoyed making something out of an originally broken helmet that I was just going to throw away. Plus, as far as I know, we've never seen this rendition of a Wolffe helmet before. I've always been curious about how he lost his eye, so this was a nice learning experience for me, as well as hopefully for you guys. Now again, I do want to mention I sell the original helmet in my shop online. This one will be undamaged, but if you want to complete this project, you could always damage it yourself. I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you're able to complete a project like this on your own. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section. I try to respond to them all. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope to see you again next time.